Dawn broke cold over Lum's farm, the storm's aftermath leaving the earth scarred and telling. He moved through morning rituals, feeding horses, checking rain barrels when he saw them. Wagon tracks, deep cut and deliberate, carved into his northern pasture where no wagon should pass. The tracks led toward the pine forest, that dark sanctuary where even daylight struggled to penetrate. Following their path, Lum found branches deliberately broken, marking a trail used many times before. His calloused hands traced the grooves in mud, finding patterns that seemed almost ceremonial. In a clearing where pines formed a natural cathedral, stones lay arranged in a perfect circle. The air held something heavy, unspoken. There, caught on rough bark like a whispered prayer, hung a torn piece of black cloth. Beside it, half buried in pine needles, glinted something that stopped his breath, a rosary, its silver cross catching the reluctant light. Something sacred had been violated here. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The morning mist clung to the pine forest floor like gauze, muffling Lum's footsteps as he pushed deeper into the grove. The rosary weighed heavy in his pocket, its silver cross cold against his palm. 20 yards past the stone circle, he heard it, a soft humming, barely audible above the wind through pine needles. A hymn, he realized. Someone was singing a hymn. He moved carefully, his boots finding purchase on the carpet of brown needles. The trees grew denser here, their trunks thick as wagon wheels, blocking most of the morning light. Remnants of pine resin torches, burnt down to blackened nubs, marked a deliberate path. Someone had needed light here, recently. The humming grew stronger. Through a break in the trees, he saw her. Sister Catherine sat with her back against an ancient pine, her black habit torn at the shoulder, her hands bound before her with hemp rope. Yet she sat with perfect composure, her spine straight, her head lifted, not defeated, waiting. Sister Catherine. Lum's voice came out rougher than intended. She turned her head slowly, without surprise. Her face, framed by her white wimple, showed exhaustion but no fear. A bruise darkened her left cheekbone, but her gray eyes remained clear, alert. "Mr. Lum." Her voice carried the Irish lilt that marked her as foreign to these parts. "I wondered when someone would come. I prayed it would be someone with conscience." He dropped to his knees beside her, pulling out his folding knife. "Who did this to you?" "Wait." Her bound hands lifted slightly. "Before you free me, you must understand what you're choosing. Look around you, but don't look at the base of that tree." She nodded toward a massive pine 10 feet away. "Not yet. You're not ready for what they've hidden." "Sister, you're hurt. I'm perfectly well. Mr. Lum, uncomfortable. Yes, but I've endured worse in service to God. Sit, listen, then decide if you truly want to involve yourself." Against every instinct, Lum sat back on his heels. The morning was warming, but the forest held yesterday's chill. He noticed things now disturbed earth near several trees, marks where something heavy had been dragged, the too perfect spacing of the torch remnants. "I came to investigate missing church funds," Sister Catherine began, her voice steady as if discussing weather. "Small amounts at first, over many months, then larger sums, money meant for the orphanage, for the poor. I traced the discrepancies to our local parish accounts." "Father Miguel's church. Father Miguel knows nothing. He's a good man, but naive. The church council manages the finances." When I started asking questions, they grew nervous. Yesterday, they invited me to a special meeting to explain everything. I was fool enough to come alone. Lum's jaw tightened. "The council brought you here." "5 of them. Samuel Morrison, Thomas Hartley, James Crawford, Robert Bennett, and your Sheriff Hutchins." She spoke each name clearly, without hatred. They showed me what they've been hiding. Then they tied me here to think about my choices while they decided what to do with me. They left you here overnight. They're frightened men. Mr. Lum, frightened men do foolish things. They hoped I would agree to leave town. Forget what I've seen. They don't understand that truth. Once known, cannot be unknown. Lum cut through the hemp rope with sharp strokes. The fibers parted reluctantly, as if they too were part of the conspiracy. Sister Catherine's hands fell free, and she rubbed her wrists slowly, wincing at the return of circulation. What did they show you? She reached into her habit, pulling out a calico handkerchief to dab at the rope burns. Records, ledgers, documents that spanned 15 years, all wrapped in oilcloth, hidden in the trees. She paused, studying his face. Mr. Lum, your farm sits on honest land, purchased fairly, but not everyone in this valley can say the same. Land fraud. Worse. They've been altering Spanish land grants, filing false claims, using church funds to bribe territorial officials. Families have been cheated, driven off property that was rightfully theirs. The stone circle you found, they meet here to conduct their business, thinking God can't see them beneath these branches. Lum helped her stand. Her legs trembled but held. We need to get you to safety. Safety. She almost smiled. Mr. Lum, there's no safety once you know the truth. There's only the choice between conscience and comfort. But yes, I would appreciate leaving this place. As they turned to go, she stopped. The ledger. If you're going to help me, and I pray you will, we need the ledger. She led him to the massive pine she'd warned him about. At its base, a natural hollow had been widened, covered with a piece of bark. Inside, wrapped in yellowed oilcloth, lay a leather-bound book, thick as a Bible. Don't open it here, she warned. The details will anger you, and anger clouds judgment. Take it. Hide it. Read it when you're calm. Lum tucked the ledger inside his coat as they walked back through the morning mist. Sister Catherine's whalebone hairpins clicking softly where they'd come loose. He realized his life had just changed. The simple farmer who'd woken this morning to check storm damage no longer existed. Sister, why didn't you scream call for help? She paused, touching the silver cross at her throat. Because, Mr. Lum, I prayed instead. I prayed for someone with the courage to act. God sent you. The weight of her words settled on him like a yoke. As they emerged from the pine forest into clean morning sunlight, Lum understood he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The truth she spoke of once known. It demanded action. Behind them, the pines stood silent, keeping their dark secrets for now. Lum's farmhouse stood simple and honest against the morning sky, its pine plank walls weathered to silver gray. Inside, Sister Catherine sat at his table while he prepared willow bark tea, the bitter remedy his mother had taught him for pain and inflammation. The ceramic wash basin beside her held water tinged pink from cleaning her rope burns. Hold still, he said, dabbing her wrists with a clean cloth. The hemp had cut deeper than he'd first thought, leaving angry welts that would scar. I've had worse from my rosary during long prayers, she said, though her jaw tightened at his touch. The kettle whistled on the cast-iron stove. Lum poured the willow bark tea into a china cup, one of the few delicate things in his bachelor household. Sister Catherine wrapped her hands around it gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her stiff fingers. The leather-bound ledger lay between them on the pine plank table, still wrapped in its oilcloth shroud. Neither had touched it since arriving. The morning light through muslin curtains cast everything in soft gold, but the ledger seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. We should know what we're facing, Sister Catherine said finally. Lum unwrapped the oilcloth carefully. The ledger's leather cover bore no marking, but its weight spoke of many pages, many secrets. He opened it to the first page, where neat script announced, Record of Necessary Transactions, Council of Prosperity, Year of Our Lord, 1865. 20 years. Sister Catherine murmured. This started 20 years ago. They read in silence, turning pages slowly. Each entry was meticulously recorded amounts diverted from church funds, land parcels acquired through false documentation, bribes paid to territorial officials. The sums grew larger as the years progressed. What started as $50 here, $100 there, had swollen to thousands. Look at this. Sister Catherine pointed to an entry from 3 years prior. The Vasquez family. I remember them. They said they'd sold their ranch and moved back to Mexico. But this says they were forced out. Their original Spanish grant was declared invalid after the council discovered a newer claim. Lum's voice grew hard. The newer claim was filed by James Crawford's brother-in-law. Page after page revealed the pattern. Families driven off land they'd held for generations. Church funds used to grease the wheels of theft, and every transaction signed by the 5 names Sister Catherine had spoken in the forest. Samuel Morrison. Lum read the signature aloud. He sits in the front pew every Sunday, as does Thomas Hartley, and James Crawford leads the church choir. Sister Catherine's voice held infinite sadness. Good men, or so I thought. How does this happen? How do good men become thieves? Slowly, Lum said. One small compromise at a time. The sound of horse hooves on packed earth made them both look up. Through the window, they watched Sheriff Hutchins dismount, his star catching the late morning sun. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving them time to see him coming. Put it away, Sister Catherine whispered. Lum rewrapped the ledger quickly, sliding it beneath a loose floorboard near the stove. By the time Hutchins knocked, they were seated calmly, the tea between them suggesting nothing more than a social visit. Lum! Hutchins stood in the doorway, hat in hand. He was a big man, gone soft around the middle but still powerful through the shoulders. His gray mustache drooped over a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. Sister Catherine, glad to see you made it back safe. Sheriff? Lum didn't invite him in. Hutchins shifted his weight, looking past them into the house. Heard there was some confusion in the pine grove this morning. Misunderstanding about a meeting. Is that what you're calling it? Sister Catherine's voice could have frozen water. Now, sister. Hutchins turned his hat in his hands. You know how stories get twisted. Few men having a private discussion about town business, and suddenly folks are talking about all sorts of wild things. Those rope burns on her wrist look real enough, Lum said quietly. Hutchins had the grace to look uncomfortable. Like I said, misunderstanding. The council wants to make it right. They're prepared to make a donation to the orphanage. Substantial donation. Help you forget this whole unpleasant business. 30 pieces of silver, Sister Catherine asked. The sheriff's face darkened. Now, sister, no need for that kind of talk. We're all Christians here, all wanting what's best for the community. Are we? She stood slowly, and despite her small stature, seemed to fill the room. Tell me, Sheriff Hutchins, how many families have been driven from their homes? How many children have gone hungry because funds meant for them lined your pockets? Nobody's gone hungry. We've built this town from nothing, made it prosperous. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. But he looked at Lum. You understand, don't you? Man builds something with his own hands. He protects it. Lum rose to stand beside Sister Catherine. I understand plenty, Sheriff. Hutchins studied them both, then settled his hat on his head. Sometimes, Lum, a wise man, tends his own garden and lets others tend theirs. Your wheat field's looking good this year. Be a shame if something happened to it. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Is that a warning, Sheriff? Lum asked. It's advice, free advice from someone who's lived here longer than you. Hutchins touched his hat brim to Sister Catherine. Sister, Father Miguel's wondering where you've been. Might be good to check in with him. Let him know you're safe. Maybe discuss that transfer to the mission in Santa Fe he mentioned. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Well now, that's between you and the church hierarchy, isn't it? But I'd hate to see a good Christian woman cause scandal. People talk, you know, woman spending time alone with a bachelor farmer. His smile was cold. Appearances matter, even when nothing improper occurs. After he left, they stood in silence, watching through the window as his horse kicked up dust down the lane. He's frightened, Sister Catherine said finally. They all are. Frightened men are dangerous men. Yes. She returned to the table, her fingers tracing the grain of the pine planks. We need help. We can't face them alone. Who would stand with us? You heard him. They've been building this town for 20 years. Everyone owes them something. Not everyone. There must be others who've suspected, who've questioned. She looked toward the hidden ledger. We need more than one book. We need witnesses, other documents. We need enough truth that they can't bury it. Lum nodded slowly. Through the window, his wheat field swayed in the noon breeze, golden and vulnerable. He thought of the Vasquez family, forced from land they'd loved. He thought of orphans going without while men sat in church pews counting stolen money. We'll need to be careful, he said. Smart? They've had 20 years to build their fortress. Then we'll take it down stone by stone. Sister Catherine's eyes held steel beneath the gray. God didn't bring us to this knowledge to let us walk away. The kerosene lamp flickered as clouds passed over the sun. In that shifting light, Lum saw the path ahead dangerous, uncertain, but necessary. The simple farmer he'd been that morning would have chosen safety, but that man was gone, replaced by someone who'd seen too much to pretend ignorance. Stone by stone, he agreed, outside. A meadowlark sang, its voice pure against the darkening sky. Change was coming, whether as gentle rain or destroying storm remained to be seen. The Henderson General Store stood at the center of town, its false front rising 2 stories above the actual roofline, pretending to grandeur it didn't possess. Lum had traded here for 5 years, his credit always good, his bills always paid. This morning, however, something had changed. I'm sorry, Mr. Lum. Young Timothy Henderson couldn't meet his eyes, focusing instead on the store ledger book spread before him. Father says we need to review all our credit accounts. Make sure everything's proper. Proper. Lum kept his voice level. What's improper about my account? Nothing. Nothing at all. It's just... The clerk's Adam's apple bobbed. Times are uncertain. Father wants cash payments for a while. You understand? Lum understood perfectly. Word traveled fast in a small town. His visit to Sister Catherine, Hutchins' warning by now, half the town knew he'd crossed an invisible line. I'll need a pound of coffee, 10 pounds of flour, and salt, Lum said, pulling silver dollars from his pocket. Cash. Timothy's relief was palpable as he hurried to fill the order. Behind them, other customers pretended not to watch, but Lum felt their eyes. Mrs. Morrison Samuel's wife turned away when he looked her direction. Tom Bradley, who'd helped with last year's harvest, suddenly found the pickle barrel fascinating. That's everything, Mr. Lum. Timothy pushed the wrapped goods across the counter. Will you be at the church social Sunday? Wouldn't miss it. Outside, Lum loaded his supplies into the wagon, noting how conversation stopped as he passed, resuming in whispers behind him. Isolation was beginning, subtle as morning frost but just as real. Sunday arrived gray and humid, the air thick with promised rain. The church social sprawled across the meadow behind Father Miguel's chapel, tables groaning under the weight of fried chicken, pound cake, and preserves. Children ran between the tables while adults clustered in careful groups, maintaining the social boundaries that shaped small-town life. Lum stood alone near the lemonade table, watching Sister Catherine move among the families. Her rope burns hidden beneath long sleeves despite the heat. She smiled. Blessed children, acted as if nothing had changed. But people stepped back when she approached, conversations faltering. Mr. Lum. He turned to find Miss Sarah Hartley, the school teacher, holding 2 cups of lemonade. She was perhaps 30, with intelligent brown eyes behind wire spectacles and brown hair pulled into a severe bun that couldn't quite hide its tendency to curl. Miss Hartley? He accepted the lemonade gratefully. Walk with me. She didn't wait for an answer, moving toward the edge of the gathering where wildflowers grew tall. Her Sunday bonnet, decorated with a simple blue ribbon, bobbed as she walked. They stopped near a cottonwood tree, far enough from others for privacy, but still within sight. Propriety maintained. My father is Thomas Hartley, she said without preamble. Lum's hand tightened on the cup. I know. No, you don't. She stared across the meadow. You know him as a council member, as one of the 5 who left Sister Catherine in the forest. But I know him as a man who hasn't slept well in 3 years, who sits at his desk at night, writing and burning letters, writing and burning. Miss Hartley. Sarah, please. She turned to face him fully. Do you know how my mother died, Mr. Lum? Fever. Wasn't it 4 years ago? That's what we told people. She took her own life. Laudanum. She left a note saying she couldn't live with the weight of what she knew. The lemonade turned bitter in Lum's mouth. Father changed after that. Tried to leave the council, but they wouldn't let him. Said he knew too much. Was in too deep. Sarah reached into her reticule, pulling out a small leather-bound diary. He wrote everything down, every transaction, every meeting, every threat. He died last winter heart failure. The doctor said, but I think he died of shame. She pressed the diary into Lum's hands. My father wrote everything down. He couldn't live with the silence anymore. The diary was worn soft, its pages thick with ink. Lum tucked it inside his coat. Why give this to me? Because Sister Catherine can't fight them alone. Because you're the first person brave enough to stand with her. And because... She adjusted her spectacles. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't know what my father helped build. This could be dangerous for you. Mr. Lum, I teach the children of the families they've cheated. I see their patched clothes, their thin faces. I've been in danger since the day I learned to read. She glanced around. There are others who suspect. The widow Martinez, whose husband died trying to prove their land claim was valid. Dr. Brennan, who's treated too many accidents that happened to people who asked questions. We've been waiting for someone to light the match. And you think I'm that someone? I think you and Sister Catherine together might be... She smoothed her skirts. There's something else. The old Copper Crown mine, the one that played out 10 years ago. They use the office there for meetings. Private meetings. There might be more records. As she walked away, Lum saw Sister Catherine watching from across the meadow. She gave the slightest nod she'd seen the exchange, understood its significance. That evening, as purple dusk settled over the valley, Lum made his way to the abandoned Copper Crown mine. The entrance yawned black against the hillside, timbers graying with age. The office stood separate, a small shack that had once housed payroll and records. He'd brought a carbide mining lamp, its harsh white light cutting through the darkness. The door, surprisingly, was well oiled, opening silently. Inside, dust motes danced in the lamplight, but paths through the dust showed recent passage. The office held a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that looked far too new for a mine abandoned a decade ago. Lum tried the cabinet locked, but the desk drawer yielded to his knife, revealing another ledger, this one bound in black leather. This wasn't a record of past crimes, but plans for future ones. Lists of families to pressure, land parcels to acquire, amounts needed for larger bribes. The council wasn't satisfied with what they'd stolen, they wanted more. Madre de Dios. Lum spun to find the widow Martinez in the doorway, her black shawl making her nearly invisible in the darkness. Behind her stood Dr. Brennan, his medical bag in one hand, a lantern in the other. "Mrs. Martinez." Lum's hand moved instinctively to his pistol. "Peace. Senor Lum." She stepped into the light. "Miss Sarah sent us. Said you might need witnesses." Dr. Brennan moved past her, studying the ledger. "My God, they're planning to take the entire valley." "Not planning," the widow said. "They've been working toward this for 20 years. My husband knew. That's why he had his accident at the mill." "How many know?" Lum asked. "More than you'd think. Fewer than we need." Brennan closed the ledger carefully. "But with this, with Thomas Hartley's diary, with the ledger Sister Catherine found, we might have enough." "Enough for what?" "To contact the federal marshal in Tucson, to bring in authority they can't buy or threaten." The doctor's face was grim. "It has to be done carefully. One messenger they can stop. But if we send multiple letters, different routes—" "I can carry one south through the desert," the widow said. "I have family in Sonora." "I'll go east to Tombstone," Brennan added. "Medical conference I've been meaning to attend." "And I'll go north," Lum said, "to Prescott." They agreed to leave within the week, each carrying copies of the most damning evidence. Sarah would transcribe the documents while Sister Catherine maintained appearances, keeping the council unsuspecting. As they prepared to leave, the widow touched Lum's arm. "They killed my husband, Senor. Made it look like an accident. But I know better. I've waited 5 years for justice. Don't let them stop you." Walking back under starlight, the carbide lamp extinguished to avoid attention, Lum felt the weight of responsibility settling heavier on his shoulders. He was no longer one man fighting alone. Others were depending on him, risking themselves for truth. At his farm, a figure waited on the porch. Sister Catherine rose as he approached. "Miss Hartley told me about the meeting," she said. "I've established safe houses for each messenger. The Franciscan Brothers in Sonora for Mrs. Martinez, the Methodist Mission in Tombstone for Dr. Brennan. The Territorial Courthouse in Prescott has a judge who owes me a favor. You've been busy. God's work requires good planning." She pulled her shawl tighter. "They're watching us now, all of us. We'll need to be clever. Or lucky. Luck is what happens when providence meets preparation. Mr. Lum." She moved toward the road, then paused. "That first ledger, the one from the pine grove, hide it somewhere they'd never think to look. It's our insurance if everything else fails." After she left, Lum stood in his dooryard, looking at the stars. The simple life he'd known was ending, but perhaps something better could be built on foundations of truth rather than lies. The council had built their empire on stolen land and broken trust. Now, stone by stone, that empire would fall. He went inside, lit his kerosene lamp, and began copying documents. There was much work to be done before dawn. Dawn came reluctant and gray, the air heavy with moisture that wouldn't quite become rain. Lum walked his fence line as he did every morning, checking for breaks or weakness. The barbed wire, strung tight just last month, should have gleamed in the early light. Instead, he found it lying in neat coils every 50 feet, cut clean through with wire cutters. Not storm damage, not accident, deliberate. His 40 head of cattle were already spreading across his neighbor's pasture, drawn by the greener grass on the other side. Lum stood at the ruined fence, calculating. 4 hours to round them up, another 6 to restring the wire, a full day's work lost, and harvest time approaching. "Lum, your cattle are in my wheat." Carl Peterson rode up fast, his face flushed with more than exertion. They'd shared harvesting duties for 3 years, working each other's fields in turn. Now Carl wouldn't meet his eyes. "I see them. Fence was cut in the night." "Cut?" Carl's surprise seemed genuine. Then his expression shifted, became careful. "Well, that's unfortunate. You'll want to get them out quick." I'll need help. Take half the time with two of us working. Carl shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. I can't today. Got my own work. Carl, we have an agreement. Your harvest, then mine. Been that way for 3 years. Things change. Carl studied his horse's mane intently. I've been thinking, might be better if we each handle our own from now on. Simpler. Simpler. Lum kept his voice level. Or safer. Carl's jaw tightened. I've got a family. Lum, 3 children. I can't afford to get involved in things that don't concern me. And what things would those be? You know what I'm talking about, that the whole town knows. You and Sister Catherine, stirring up old troubles, asking questions better left unasked. Carl gathered his reins. I'm sorry about your fence, but maybe take it as a sign. Keep to yourself, tend your own business, and fences stop getting cut. He rode off without looking back, leaving Lum alone with 40 scattered cattle and miles of ruined fence. The message was clear as the morning sky isolation was the price of defiance. By evening, Lum had managed to recover most of his cattle and patch the worst breaks in the fence. His hands were raw from working with wire, his back aching, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight in his chest. 3 other neighbors had ridden by during the day. None had offered help. The town hall stood in the center of Main Street, its bell tower reaching toward heaven while its foundation rested firmly in earthly concerns. Tonight, yellow lamplight spilled from its windows, and the hitching posts outside were crowded with horses and wagons. Emergency town meeting, the notice had said. Discussion of outside agitators and community harmony. Lum entered to find the hall already packed. Wooden folding chairs arranged in neat rows were filled with townspeople, their faces turned toward the raised platform where the council sat. Samuel Morrison held the gavel, his merchant suit impeccable despite the heat. Beside him, James Crawford and Robert Bennett conferred in low voices. Sheriff Hutchins stood by the door, watching everyone who entered. The pot-belly stove in the corner sat cold. The packed room generated enough heat on its own. Someone had placed a spittoon near the platform, and the slate voting board on the wall bore the meeting's agenda in neat chalk letters, protecting our community from disruption. Lum found a seat near the back. Sister Catherine sat 3 rows ahead, surrounded by empty chairs as if she carried contagion. Father Miguel sat beside her, the elderly priest's presence the only reason she hadn't been completely shunned. Gentlemen, ladies, Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years' leadership. We've called this meeting to address concerns about recent disruptions to our peaceful community. What disruptions? Called out Jack Murphy, the blacksmith. Town seems quiet to me. Quiet on the surface, perhaps, Morrison replied. But there are those who would stir up old grievances, question established arrangements, bring trouble from outside authorities. You mean the federal marshal? Lum said, standing slowly. Every head turned. Morrison's gavel hand tightened. Mr. Lum, we hadn't recognized you to speak. Then recognize me now. Morrison's smile was thin. Very well. You have something to say. I do. Lum moved into the aisle. You talk about outside agitators, but the only agitation I see is from within. Fences cut in the night. Credit withdrawn from honest customers. Good neighbors suddenly afraid to honor agreements. If you're having troubles with your property, perhaps you should examine your own actions, Crawford suggested. A man who keeps questionable company, who involves himself in matters that don't concern him. What matters would those be? Lum interrupted. The matter of stolen land, missing church funds, families driven from their homes. The hall erupted in whispers. Morrison pounded his gavel. Order. These are serious accusations. Mr. Lum, do you have proof? Do you deny them? I deny nothing and admit nothing, but a man who makes accusations without proof is a dangerous man, a troublemaker. And what do you call men who meet in secret in pine groves who leave a woman of God tied to a tree overnight? Lum's voice carried clear and strong. What do you call men who've spent 20 years building prosperity on theft? Hutchins stepped forward. That's enough, Lum. You're disturbing the peace. The peace? Sister Catherine stood now, her small figure commanding attention. There is no peace built on lies, Sheriff. Only the appearance of peace, rotting from within. Sister. Morrison's tone turned patronizing. We understand you've been through an ordeal. Perhaps your judgment is affected. My judgment is perfectly clear, Mr. Morrison. She moved to stand beside Lum. Clear enough to see that this community stands at a crossroads. We can continue down the path of deception, or we can choose truth. Truth, Bennett scoffed. Whose truth? Yours? This outsider's? He gestured at Lum. You've been here, 5 years? You don't understand how we've built this town, the sacrifices we've made. Sacrifices. The widow Martinez stood in the back row. Like my husband's life was that one of your sacrifices. Senor Bennett. The crowd stirred uneasily. Morrison pounded his gavel again. This meeting is about moving forward, not dwelling on the past. The past isn't past if it's still happening, Dr. Brennan said, rising from his seat. How many more families will lose their land? Samuel, how much is enough? A community built on lies is like a house on sand, Lum said, his voice cutting through the noise. The truth will out, gentle or harsh. Better we face it ourselves than have it forced upon us. Morrison stood, his face flushed. Are you threatening this council? Mr. Lum, I'm offering you a chance, all of you. Come forward. Admit what's been done. Make restitution. The federal authorities might show mercy to those who confess voluntarily. Federal authorities have no jurisdiction here, J.J. Hutchins said. Land fraud across territorial boundaries. Theft of funds from a religious institution with national ties. Lum shook his head. They have jurisdiction. Sheriff, and they're coming, whether we invite them or not. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Some shouted support for the council. Others demanded answers. Through it all, Morrison watched Lum with cold calculation, like a man measuring an enemy. As people filed out, arguing in small groups, 3 families approached Lum quietly. The Johnsons, whose son had died in a mining accident at a supposedly closed shaft. The Kowalskis, Polish immigrants who'd lost half their claim to a surveying error. The Chen family, who ran the laundry and had seen too much in the clothes they washed. We want to help, Mrs. Johnson whispered, but we're afraid. Fear is natural, Sister Catherine told them gently. But courage is fear that has said its prayers. We'll protect each other. They agreed to meet secretly, to share what they knew, to prepare for what was coming. As the hall emptied, Morrison approached Lum. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. We've offered you peace. Don't force us to offer something else. Is that a threat, Samuel? It's a prediction. Men who stand in the way of progress tend to get run over. He tipped his hat to Sister Catherine. Sister, Father Miguel is concerned about your living situation. A woman alone in the rectory cottage, entertaining male visitors. People talk. Let them talk, she replied. Their words are wind. Morrison's smile was cold. Wind can become a storm, sister, and storms destroy things. After he left, Lum walked Sister Catherine to the rectory. The street was dark. Most windows already shuttered for the night. They're getting desperate, she said. Desperate men do desperate things. Yes. She paused at her door. Mr. Lum, whatever comes next, remember we've already won something. People are talking. Questions are being asked. The silence is broken. That's not enough. No, she agreed. But it's a beginning. Change comes slowly. Then suddenly, we've started the slow part. The sudden will follow. As Lum rode home through the darkness, he noticed lights in windows that were usually dark, shadows of people watching from behind curtains. The town was awake, alert, divided. The comfortable consensus of 20 years was cracking. At his farm, he found a note nailed to his door, last warning. He crumpled it, threw it in the stove, and began preparing for what he knew was coming. The time for warnings was over. Now would come the storm Morrison had promised. But Lum had weathered storms before. This one, at least, had purpose. He cleaned his rifle, checked his ammunition, and barricaded his doors. Not because he planned violence, but because he knew others might. Then he sat at his table, copying more documents by lamplight. If they came for him, the truth would survive. Outside, wind began to rise, rattling the windows. Change was coming to the valley. Gentle or harsh remained to be seen, but it was coming, inevitable as dawn after the darkest night. The church vestry held shadows like cupped hands holding water, the candlelight barely reaching the corners where dust motes swirled in drafts from the old walls. 7 people sat in a circle of mismatched chairs pulled from the sanctuary, their faces half lit, half hidden. Sister Catherine had chosen this place carefully sacred ground, where even the council might hesitate to trespass. Lum counted them silently himself. Sister Catherine, Sarah Hartley, Dr. Brennan, the widow Martinez, and 2 unexpected additions, Walter Johnson, whose son had died in the mine, and most surprisingly, Thomas Hartley, Sarah's uncle and former council member, whom everyone had believed was traveling back east. Thomas looked like a man being slowly crushed from within. His once prosperous frame had withered, his clothes hanging loose, his hands trembling as he clutched a leather portfolio. Sarah sat beside him, her hand on his arm, whether for comfort or to prevent flight. Lum couldn't tell. "Thank you for coming," Sister Catherine began, her voice soft in the hushed space. The vestry candles flickered, sending shadows dancing across the Spanish crucifix on the wall. "What we discuss tonight must remain between us until we're ready to act. Why is he here?" Walter Johnson pointed at Thomas. His grief crystallized into anger. "He's one of them. Counsel. Murderer." "Walter." Dr. Brennan began. "No. My boy died in a shaft that was supposed to be sealed. This man signed the order saying it was safe." Johnson's voice cracked. 16 years old. Crushed when the timbers gave way. Thomas lifted his head, and Lum saw tears streaming down the man's weathered cheeks. "You're right," Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper. "I signed it. God help me. I signed many things." "Uncle Thomas has something to show us," Sarah said firmly. "Something that changes everything." The old man opened his portfolio with shaking hands, pulling out documents yellow with age. Some bore official seals in red wax. Others were tied with faded ribbons. Spanish parchments, Lum realized. Original land grants from when this was still Mexico's territory. "These are the real grants," Thomas said. "The ones we were supposed to destroy 20 years ago." The room fell silent except for the whisper of turning pages. Each document bore names Lum recognized, families who'd been driven out, told their claims were invalid, their grants forgeries. "The Vasquez family," the widow Martinez breathed, touching one parchment gently. "They owned everything from the river to the mountain pass. 3,000 acres, Thomas confirmed. Worth a fortune now with the railroad coming through. Morrison wanted it, so we made it disappear." "How?" Dr. Brennan asked. Thomas pulled out another set of documents identical to the first but subtly different. "Forgeries. We hired a man from San Francisco, expert in old Spanish script, changed boundaries, altered dates, inserted clauses that invalidated claims. Then we filed these with the territorial office while destroying the originals." "But you didn't destroy them," Lum observed. "No." Thomas's hands covered his face. "I couldn't. My wife, God rest her soul, she knew something was wrong, started following me, found where I was hiding them. She couldn't live with it." Sarah's arm went around her uncle's shoulders as he wept, the sound echoing off the stone walls. Through a gap in the vestry door, Lum could see the confession booth, its dark wood polished by countless admissions of sin, though none perhaps as vast as this. It started small, Thomas continued when he could speak. Morrison said we needed to consolidate land for the town's growth, just a few parcels from families who were leaving anyway. We told ourselves it was for the greater good. We, Sister Catherine prompted gently. The five of us, Morrison, Crawford, Bennett, Hutchins, and myself. We called ourselves the Council of Prosperity. Morrison had connections in the territorial government. Crawford knew the banker in Prescott. Bennett handled the legal papers. Hutchins made sure no one asked questions. And you? Johnson's voice was hard. I kept the books. 2 sets, one for public display, one real. Thomas pulled out a second ledger, this one bound in green leather. Every transaction, every bribe, every family we destroyed. Dr. Brennan opened the ledger, whistling low. These amounts. You bribed judges, surveyors, tax assessors, anyone who might question our claims. The church funds made it easy. Who suspects money coming from a religious institution? How much? Sister Catherine asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Over 20 years, close to $100,000. The number hung in the air like incense, heavy and choking. In a frontier town where a man might earn $30 a month, it was an unimaginable sum. My husband knew, the widow Martinez said suddenly. He tried to prove our grant was real. That's why Hutchins arranged his accident. Thomas's voice was hollow. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We told ourselves no one would be hurt. But once you start down that path... You can't stop, Lum finished. Each crime requires another to cover it. Thomas nodded miserably. Morrison controls everything now. The bank, the merchants, even the newspaper. Anyone who opposes him loses their credit, their job, their home. He owns this town. Not the church, Sister Catherine said firmly. Doesn't he? Thomas laughed bitterly. Father Miguel is a good man, but weak. Morrison chose him specifically because he wouldn't ask questions about the finances. And now with the bishop talking about transferring you. The bishop. Sister Catherine's eyes sharpened. Morrison has connections in the diocese. Large donations buy influence everywhere. Thomas pulled out a letter. This came last week. Your transfer orders. Just waiting for Morrison to decide when to enforce them. Sister Catherine read the letter, her face paling. Santa Fe, 1,000 miles away. Unless you stop asking questions, Thomas added. Sarah had been quiet, studying the documents. Now she looked up. Uncle, these original grants, would they hold up legally? If we could get them to honest authorities, yes, the Spanish grants are protected by treaty, but Morrison has every judge in the territory in his pocket. Not federal judges, Dr. Brennan said slowly. Not the Federal Marshal Service. How would we even reach them? Johnson asked. Morrison reads every telegram, controls every mail route. We go in person, Lum said. Multiple messengers, different routes, like we discussed. Thomas shook his head. You don't understand. Morrison has people watching the roads. He'll know if anyone tries to leave with documents. Then we create a distraction, the widow Martinez suggested. Something that draws his attention while the real messengers slip away. Thus they spent the next hour planning, using the communion wine cellar's coolness to think clearly. 3 messengers would leave on the same night, each carrying copies of the most damning evidence. But first, they would stage a public confrontation, making Morrison believe they were still trying to fight him locally. I'll be the distraction, Thomas said suddenly. I'll go to Morrison, tell him I want back on the council. While he's dealing with me, The others can leave." "He'll never believe you," Sarah protested. "He will if I'm convincing enough, if I grovel enough." Thomas's jaw set. "It's the least I can do." Dr. Brennan had been examining the Spanish grants with a magnifying glass. "These seals, these signatures, they're unquestionable. With these and the ledgers, federal authorities will have to act." "There's more," Thomas said quietly. He pulled out a final document. "Morrison's planning something bigger. He's been in contact with railroad speculators. Once he controls all the land, he plans to sell it to the railroad for 10 times what he paid. Everyone in town will be forced out except those loyal to him." "When?" Lum asked. "Within the month. He's already started foreclosing on loans, calling in debts. The Chens, the Kowalskis, half a dozen other families, they'll be gone by month's end unless we stop him." Sister Catherine stood, her small figure seeming to fill the room. "Then we have no time to waste. Tomorrow, Thomas approaches Morrison. Tomorrow night, our messengers leave. Within a week, federal marshals will know everything. And if Morrison suspects," Johnson asked. "Then we fight another way," Lum said. "But violence is his weapon, not ours. We fight with truth." "Truth," Thomas laughed bitterly. "I spent 20 years running from it. Now it's all I have left." He looked at Johnson. "Your boy. The others who died, I can't bring them back. But I can try to prevent more deaths. Will you let me?" Johnson was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "For my boy. For all of them." They left the vestry one at a time, spacing their departures to avoid suspicion. Lum went last, helping Sister Catherine extinguish the candles. In the darkness, the church felt ancient, eternal, a refuge from the temporal greed outside. "Thomas won't survive this," Sister Catherine said quietly. "Morrison won't forgive betrayal. He knows. That's his penance. And if we fail—" Lum looked at the altar, its simple cross barely visible in the moonlight through stained glass. "Then we'll have tried. Sometimes that's all God asks." Outside, the town slept uneasily. Dogs barked at shadows, and somewhere a baby cried. Change was coming, carried in leather portfolios and desperate hearts. The foundation of lies that held the town was cracking, and soon the whole structure would fall. Lum walked home through empty streets, the documents hidden beneath his coat. Each step felt like crossing a bridge that burned behind him. There was no going back now. Morrison's empire would fall, or they would fall trying to topple it. At his farm, he hid the Spanish grants in a place Morrison would never think to look buried beneath his wife's grave marker. The one piece of land Lum held too sacred to disturb. She would have approved, he thought. She had always stood for truth. Tomorrow would bring the storm. But tonight, for these last few hours, the valley slept in ignorant peace, unaware that its chains were about to break. The smell of smoke pulled Lum from restless sleep, acrid and wrong in the pre-dawn darkness. Not wood smoke from a chimney or the sweet scent of prairie grass burning. This was wheat, his entire year's labor turning to ash in the night. He threw off his blanket, pulled on his boots, and ran outside barefoot otherwise. The packed earth cold beneath his feet. The northern field glowed orange against the black sky, flames running through the mature wheat like amber waves of destruction. The fire had been set at multiple points along the field's edge. This was no accident from a careless spark. Lum grabbed the water buckets from beside the door, knowing even as he ran that it was futile. 40 acres of wheat, dry from the autumn sun, burned like tinder. By the time he reached the field's edge, the heat drove him back, his face stinging from the intensity. Fire. Fire at the Lum place. Someone had seen the glow. Within minutes, neighbors arrived with their own buckets, forming a brigade from his well to the field. Carl Peterson was among them, avoiding Lum's eyes as he passed buckets. The Johnsons, the Kowalskis, even some who'd shunned him at the town meeting, they all came. But they worked slowly, inefficiently. Water slopped from buckets held carelessly. Men stumbled over nothing, delaying the line. What should have been a coordinated effort to save at least part of the crop became a performance of help without substance. "The east side," Lum shouted. "We can save the east side if we move quickly." But the line shifted sluggishly, and by the time they redirected their efforts, the fire had jumped the firebreak he'd plowed, consuming the last untouched section. By dawn, his entire wheat crop was gone, transformed into smoking black stubble that stretched to the horizon. The neighbors departed as the sun rose, murmuring condolences that rang hollow. "Terrible accident," they said. "These things happen," they said. Not one met his eyes. Sheriff Hutchins arrived as the last neighbor left, surveying the destruction from horseback. "Heard you had some trouble." "You heard right." Lum stood in the ashes, his face and hands black with soot. "Dangerous thing. Fire. Spreads quick. Could have taken your house, your barn. Lucky it didn't. Lucky." The word tasted like ash in Lum's mouth. Hutchins shifted in his saddle. "Man who's lost his crop might think about moving on, starting fresh somewhere else. I hear California's nice. Good soil, they say. I'm not going anywhere. No, well, a man's got to eat. Hard to do that with no crop to sell, no credit at the store." Hutchins touched his hat brim. "You take care, Lum. Hate to see anything else unfortunate happen." As the sheriff rode away, Lum saw a figure in black approaching on foot. Sister Catherine walked through the ruined field, her habit hem darkening with ash. She carried a leather mail pouch. "I came as soon as I heard," she said, looking at the devastation. 40 acres, a year's work, gone. Not just the wheat that's gone, I'm afraid." She handed him an envelope from the pouch. "This came by telegraph message this morning. Bishop's orders." Lum read the brief message. Sister Catherine was to report to the Santa Fe mission immediately. A stagecoach had been arranged, departing at noon. Any delay would be considered defiance of church authority. "They coordinated it," Lum said. "The fire, your transfer. Morrison's reaching." "Yes." She walked to a section where wheat stalks still stood, skeletal and black. "But he's also desperate. These aren't the actions of a confident man." "You can't go to Santa Fe." "I must. To refuse would mean excommunication. I would lose any influence I have." She turned to face him. "But the federal marshal won't come for one man's word. Without you, without Thomas, who's probably being watched every moment, without the others who are too frightened to speak." Lum's voice trailed off. Sister Catherine reached into her habit, pulling out a small paper folded many times. "I wrote this last night. Something told me I might not have another chance." The note was brief. "The grants are real. The ledgers are true. Stand firm. Even in the darkest night, dawn comes. Do not let my absence silence you. See." "This doesn't change anything," Lum said. "It changes everything. You're not alone, even when you stand by yourself." She looked at the rising sun. "I must go. The stagecoach schedule waits for no one." "Morrison wins." "No. Morrison has won a battle. The war continues." She touched his soot-covered hand. "Mr. Lum, you could have ignored those tracks that morning, could have left me in the forest, could have chosen comfortable ignorance, but you didn't. That man, the one who chose conscience over comfort, he's still here, even in these ashes." After she left, Lum stood alone in his ruined field. The sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of destruction. Not just the wheat, but his fences had been torn down again. His tool shed had been ransacked. Even his water barrels had been overturned, the precious water soaking uselessly into the ground. He walked to his house, finding another note nailed to the door. "Last chance. Leave or burn with your next crop." Inside, everything had been searched. Drawers pulled out, mattress cut open, floorboards pried up. They'd been looking for the documents. They hadn't found them. The grants remained safe beneath sacred ground, but the violation of his home felt worse than the burning field. Lum sat at his kitchen table, head in his hands. 5 years of building a life here, gone in one night. No crop meant no money. No money meant no supplies for winter. He could sell the land. Take Morrison's money. Start over somewhere else. It would be easy. Sensible. He made coffee, the familiar ritual a small comfort. The leather mail pouch Sister Catherine had carried lay on the table. Inside, along with her transfer orders, he found other papers, copies she'd made of the most damning evidence. A letter to the federal marshal in Prescott. She'd prepared everything for mailing but hadn't had time. As he read through her meticulous notes, Lum heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. He reached for his rifle, then stopped. If Morrison's men had come to finish things, fighting would only give them excuse for violence. But the rider who dismounted at his door wasn't one of Morrison's men. It was a stranger in a black suit, trail dusty but official-looking, with a badge on his vest that caught the morning light. Behind him, 2 other men remained mounted, rifles across their saddles. Mr. Lum Josiah Lum. Yes. Federal Marshal Andrew Collins, out of Prescott. The man's weathered face was professionally neutral. I received an interesting telegram 3 days ago, anonymous but detailed, about land fraud, theft of church funds, conspiracy involving local officials. Lum's heart began to pound. Who sent it? Like I said, anonymous. But it mentioned you'd have proof. Collins looked at the burned field. Also mentioned you might be in danger. Seems they were right. How do I know you're really a federal marshal? Morrison has... Collins pulled out official papers, seals intact. Smart to be cautious. I've brought Judge Hartwell's authorization and 2 deputies as witnesses. We're here to investigate, Mr. Lum. But we need those documents the telegram mentioned. Lum was silent for a long moment. This could be a trap. But what did he have left to lose? The documents exist, he said carefully. Can you produce them? Yes, but there's a condition. Collins raised an eyebrow. You're making conditions to a federal marshal. Sister Catherine was forced to leave town this morning. Church transfer to Santa Fe. She's on the noon stage. She needs to be here for this. We can't interfere with church business. She's a material witness to attempted murder her own. They tied her to a tree and left her overnight. That's federal jurisdiction, isn't it? Collins considered. It is. Jenkins, he called to one of his deputies. Ride to the stage depot. Explain to Sister Catherine that she's needed as a witness in a federal investigation. Be respectful but firm. As the deputy rode off, Lum felt something shift inside him. The despair that had weighed him down began to lift. The documents are hidden. I'll need a shovel. Burned your field, did they? Collins observed. In my experience, men don't destroy 40 acres of wheat over false accusations. No, Lum agreed. They don't. He led Collins to the small cemetery plot behind his house, where a single headstone marked his wife's grave. She died 3 years ago, fever. I brought her here to build a life. Now I'm going to use her grave to save other lives. I think she'd approve. We'll witness this, Collins said formally. Note the time and date. Any documents recovered will be entered as evidence. Lum dug carefully beside the headstone, not disturbing the grave itself. 3 feet down, his shovel struck the oilcloth bundle. Inside, the Spanish grants and ledgers remained intact, protected from moisture and decay. Collins examined them, whistling low. These are genuine. The seals alone. This is bigger than I thought. There's more. Thomas Hartley has another set of documents, and there are witnesses ready to testify if they're protected. They will be. Collins's face was grim. Mr. Lum, what you've done here standing up to this conspiracy alone that takes courage. Not alone, Lum said, looking at his burned field where Sister Catherine had walked that morning. Never alone. The sun climbed toward noon, hot and bright. In the distance, dust announced the deputy's return, and beside him, a figure in black. Sister Catherine had been retrieved. Lum stood in the ashes of his wheat field, dawn light revealing not destruction but transformation. They could burn the grain, but they couldn't burn the truth from his heart. And now, finally, justice was coming to the valley. Federal Marshal Andrew Collins established his temporary headquarters in the town hall, transforming the space that had once served Morrison's authority into an instrument of justice. His investigation was methodical, thorough. Each piece of evidence cataloged and verified with the precision of a man who'd spent 20 years untangling frontier corruption. The territorial judge arrived on the third day, traveling with an armed escort that made clear the federal government's serious intent. Judge Harrison Blackwood was a tall, austere man who carried his traveling bench, a portable wooden desk with the territorial seal as if it were a sacred relic. He set it up in the corner of the hall, the seal's eagle seeming to watch over the proceedings. "Mr. Lum," Judge Blackwood said, examining the Spanish grants through a magnifying glass, "these documents are authentic. The seals match our archived records perfectly. These families were robbed." Sister Catherine sat beside Lum, having been officially retained as a witness. Her transfer orders had been suspended pending the investigation. She'd spent the previous 2 days working with Marshal Collins, her memory proving remarkably precise about dates, amounts, and conversations. "The church funds alone amount to grand larceny," Collins reported to the judge. "But the land fraud crosses territorial boundaries. This is federal." Thomas Hartley had been brought in that morning, flanked by deputies for his own protection. His attempt to rejoin the council had failed. Morrison had suspected betrayal immediately, but it had served its purpose. While Morrison dealt with Thomas, the 3 messengers had successfully departed with their evidence. Now Thomas sat at a separate table, methodically explaining 20 years of criminal conspiracy to a court recorder. "Every transaction is here," Thomas said, his voice steady despite his hollow eyes. "I kept records of everything. I knew someday it would come to this." The town had gathered outside, drawn by rumor and speculation. Through the windows, Lum could see faces pressed against the glass, some fearful, some hopeful, all sensing that their world was about to change fundamentally. "We need Morrison and the others," Collins said. "Judge, I request authority to arrest the council members." "Granted." Blackwood signed the warrants with a flourish. "Bring them in." But before the deputies could move, the church bell began to ring, not the regular call to service, but an emergency toll that brought everyone into the streets. Father Miguel stood in the bell tower, pulling the rope with unusual vigor. "Town meeting," he called. "Everyone to the church, important announcement." Collins frowned. "What's this about?" "I don't know," Lum said. But Sister Catherine was already moving toward the door. "We should go," she said. "All of us. Bring the documents." The church filled quickly, townspeople cramming into pews and standing along the walls. The altar had been cleared, and in front of it stood Samuel Morrison, James Crawford, Robert Bennett, and Sheriff Hutchins. They looked older, smaller somehow, their usual confident bearing replaced by something Lum couldn't quite identify. Judge Blackwood and Marshal Collins took seats in the front row, their presence causing a ripple of whispers through the congregation. The federal badges gleamed in the candlelight, symbols of an authority that couldn't be bought or threatened. Morrison stepped forward, and the church fell silent. He looked at the assembled crowd, his neighbors, his victims, his co-conspirators, and when he spoke, his voice cracked. "We lost our way." Those 3 words hung in the air like a confession long overdue. Morrison continued, his merchant's eloquence deserting him, leaving only a man struggling with truth. 20 years ago, we told ourselves we were building something great, making the town prosper. We said the ends justified the means. We were wrong." Crawford stepped forward next, the choir leader whose voice had lifted so many Sunday services. "We stole. We lied. We destroyed families. The Vasquez family, the Martinezes. Dozens of others. We took what was theirs and called it progress." A sob came from the back of the church. Senora Vasquez, elderly now, had returned from Mexico when she heard about the investigation. Her daughter held her as she wept. "These good people," Morrison gestured toward Lum and Sister Catherine, "showed us the path back. They stood against us when we held all the power. They risked everything for truth." Sheriff Hutchins unpinned his badge, setting it on the altar. "I betrayed my oath. I was supposed to protect everyone, but I only protected the powerful." I'm resigning, effective immediately. Bennett, the lawyer who'd crafted their fraudulent documents, pulled out a leather portfolio. These are deeds, real ones, returning all stolen land to rightful owners or their descendants. I'll be disbarred for this, but it's the least I can do. The congregation stirred, disbelief mixing with hope. Some families had waited 20 years for this moment. Morrison faced the crowd fully now. We can't undo the harm, can't bring back the dead or restore lost years, but we can try to make things right. We're prepared to return all stolen property, repay all stolen funds with interest, and accept whatever punishment the law demands. Why? Someone called out. Why confess now? Morrison looked at Lum. Because a burned wheat field showed me what we'd become. When you destroy a man's honest labor out of fear, you're no longer building, you're just destroying. I couldn't face another morning knowing what we'd done. Judge Blackwood stood. Gentlemen, confession is admirable, but it doesn't erase crimes. You'll still face trial. We know, Crawford said. We're prepared for that. What about the others? Dr. Brennan called out. The territorial officials you bribed, the judges you bought, will testify, Thomas Hartley said, standing shakily. Name every person, every transaction. The corruption goes to the territorial capital, but it starts here. We'll expose all of it. Sister Catherine moved to the altar, her small figure commanding attention. Confession without repentance is merely words. Repentance requires action. What actions will you take? Morrison pulled out his own ledger, not the hidden one, but his personal accounts. Everything I own came from theft. I propose liquidating all assets, using the funds to compensate victims. The others have agreed to do the same. That could be millions, someone whispered. Less than what we stole, Bennett replied. With interest and damages, we'll likely die paupers. It's appropriate. The widow Martinez stood, her black shawl framing her weathered face. You killed my husband. Money won't bring him back. Hutchins faced her directly. No, it won't. I arranged the accident. I'll confess this at trial. You deserve to see me hanged for it. No. Her voice was firm. I don't want more death. I want the truth known. I want his name cleared. I want my children to know their father died trying to expose you. It will be done, Morrison promised. A monument to all who suffered, their names, their stories, carved in stone for all to see. Marshal Collins had been taking notes throughout. Now he stood. Gentlemen, voluntary confession will be considered at sentencing, but you're still under arrest. Deputies, take them into custody. As the four men were led away in shackles, Morrison stopped before Lum. I ask your forgiveness. Lum studied the man who'd ordered his field burned, who'd tried to destroy him. He thought of Sister Catherine's words about truth and reconciliation. Forgiveness is earned through actions, not words. Show me you've truly changed, and we'll discuss forgiveness. Morrison nodded and continued walking, the chains on his wrists clanking with each step. Father Miguel, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. This is a day of judgment, but also of grace. The church will establish a fund for all victims. We'll ensure no family suffers while waiting for restitution. With what money, someone asked. They stole the church funds too. With mine, a voice said from the back. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Morrison, Samuel's wife, standing tall despite her tears. I inherited wealth from my family. It was never touched by my husband's schemes. I'm liquidating everything. Other wives of the conspirators stood as well, each pledging their own resources. The community watched in amazement as the powerful families voluntarily reduced themselves to poverty. Judge Blackwood addressed the congregation. Justice will be served through the courts, but healing must come from within your community. I suggest forming a commission, equal representatives from all affected groups to oversee restitution and rebuilding. I nominate Lum, Walter Johnson called out. And Sister Catherine, added the widow Martinez. The vote was unanimous, though Lum tried to refuse. I'm not a leader. I'm just a farmer who saw something wrong." "Exactly the kind of leader we need," Dr. Brennan said. As the meeting concluded, people began approaching the altar, not for communion but for confession. Small thefts, silences when they should have spoken, turning away when neighbors suffered. The whole town seemed to need cleansing. Sister Catherine stood beside Lum as they watched the community begin to heal. "You lit a match, Mr. Lum. Look what it illuminated." "We lit it together," he corrected, "and nearly got burned for it. Fire purifies as well as destroys. Your wheat field had to burn for this to grow." That evening, the church women organized communal supper tables in the meadow, for the first time in years. There were no separate sections for rich and poor, no invisible boundaries between those who belonged and those who were tolerated. The Vasquez family sat with the Morrisons' abandoned children. The Chinese families ate beside the Irish. Former enemies shared bread. Marshal Collins found Lum standing apart, watching the unprecedented gathering. "You did something remarkable here, Lum. I've seen plenty of towns torn apart by corruption, but I've never seen one come together like this to heal." "They came together because the truth gave them permission," Lum replied. "For 20 years, everyone knew something was wrong but felt powerless. Once the truth was spoken aloud, the power shifted." Thomas Hartley, released on bond pending trial, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Lum, I know I have no right to ask, but my land, I want to deed it to the families we wronged. Would you help me identify them all?" "That's Sister Catherine's specialty. She knows every family's story." As night fell, lanterns were lit around the meadow. Someone brought out a fiddle, and music filled the air, not celebratory, but contemplative, acknowledging both loss and hope. Children who'd never been allowed to play together ran between the tables while their parents tentatively rebuilt connections. Dr. Brennan raised a glass of water. No one felt like drinking anything stronger. "To truth," he said simply. "To courage," Sister Catherine added, looking at Lum. "To redemption," Lum concluded, thinking of Morrison in his cell, finally free from 20 years of lies. The federal investigation would continue for months. Trials would be held, sentences served, restitution made. But here, in this moment, a community was choosing to heal rather than revenge, to rebuild rather than remain broken. The church bell rang again, this time in celebration. Not of victory, but of possibility, the possibility that from the ashes of corruption, something honest could grow. The bell's bronze voice carried across the valley, announcing to all who could hear that justice had finally come home. As the gathering continued into the night, Lum realized his burned field had been a small price to pay for this transformation. The wheat would grow again, but more importantly, trust would grow. The community built on lies had fallen, but on its ruins, they would build something true. The morning air carried the sweet scent of fresh-cut pine and sawdust as wagons rolled into Lum's farm, loaded with lumber and tools. A year had passed since the fire that destroyed his wheat, a year since truth had finally broken through decades of deception. Now, on this crisp October morning, the entire valley had come to raise a new barn where the old had stood. Women arrived with baskets of food. Children ran between the wagons, and men rolled up their sleeves, ready for the ancient ritual of barn raising that bound communities together stronger than any law. The foundation stones had been laid the week before, and now the wooden frame would rise against the sky, a testament to what could be built when people worked together in honesty. Lum stood watching the organized chaos, still amazed at the transformation. His wheat field, replanted with seed donated by neighbors, had yielded the best harvest anyone could remember. The soil, enriched by ash from the fire, had produced grain so abundant that he needed to borrow storage space from 3 other farms. "Morning, Lum," Carl Peterson called out, unloading heavy beams from his wagon. The man who'd once abandoned Lum now worked beside him regularly. Their shared harvesting agreement not just restored but strengthened. Beautiful day for building. Sister Catherine emerged from the house, carrying a tray of coffee for the workers. She'd returned from Santa Fe immediately after the trial, the bishop himself apologizing for her forced transfer. She now ran a permanent mission in the valley, teaching school and managing the restitution fund that helped families rebuild their lives. 63 people, she said, standing beside Lum. I counted. 63 people here to help you build. To help us build, Lum corrected. This barn will serve the whole community. Shared storage, shared equipment, shared prosperity. The idea had been Sarah Hartley's, proposed at one of the monthly town meetings that had replaced the old council system. Instead of individual farmers struggling alone, they would pool resources, share knowledge, work together. The barn would be the physical symbol of this new cooperation. A familiar figure approached from the road, walking slowly but steadily. Samuel Morrison, released from federal prison 6 months early for good behavior and cooperation with authorities, carried a toolbox in his weathered hands. He'd aged 10 years in one, his hair gone completely gray, his merchant's soft body now lean from hard labor. The crowd grew quiet as Morrison approached Lum. I know I might not be welcome, Morrison said quietly, but I'm a fair hand with a hammer, if you'll have me. Lum studied the man who'd once ordered his destruction. Morrison's estate had been liquidated, every penny going to families he'd wronged. He lived now in a single room above the feed store, working as a clerk for the new owner, ironically, Mr. Chen, one of his former victims. Every hand is welcome, Lum said, extending his own. We build together, or not at all. Morrison's eyes filled with tears as they shook hands. Around them, the crowd relaxed, returning to their work. Redemption, they were learning, was not a single moment but a daily choice. The barn frame began to rise as men worked in coordinated teams. The corner posts went up first, massive beams that 4 men could barely lift. Then the connecting joists, the roof supports, each piece fitting precisely because everyone knew their role. Children handed up tools, women kept water buckets full, and even Father Miguel, elderly and frail, contributed by blessing each beam before it was raised. At midday, they broke for dinner spread on long tables made from planks and sawhorses. The quilting circle had set up under the oak trees, their needles flying as they worked on a communal quilt that would hang in the new barn, each square telling part of the valley's story, both its darkness and its redemption. Thomas Hartley sat at one table, his hands still trembling from the palsy that had struck him during the trial. He'd served 3 months before being released for health reasons, and now helped Sister Catherine with the complex work of researching land claims and genealogies. Beside him sat his daughter Sarah, now head of the valley's first proper school, built with restitution funds. Remember this day, Sarah told her students, who'd been given a holiday to witness the barn raising. This is how communities heal, not through forgetting, but through choosing to build something better on the foundations of truth. The afternoon work focused on the roof, dangerous work that required the most skilled men. Sheriff Hutchins, former sheriff. Lum reminded himself directed the effort. After serving 8 months, he'd returned to find his position filled by a younger man, Deputy Jenkins, who'd helped with the federal investigation. But Hutchins had found new purpose teaching younger men the skills he'd learned over decades, using his knowledge to build rather than control. Steady there, boys, Hutchins called out as a heavy beam swayed. Together now, lift on 3. The apple cider press had been set up near the house, and children took turns crushing apples from Lum's small orchard. The scent of fresh cider mixed with sawdust and sweat, creating the particular perfume of autumn labor. Mrs. Morrison, who'd kept her husband's name despite everything, supervised the press, ensuring every child got a turn and a cup of the sweet result. As the sun began its descent, the barn stood complete in frame, lacking only siding and interior finishing, but that would come over the following weeks. Today was about the raising, the community statement that they could build together. Sister Catherine climbed a ladder to the barn's peak, where a cornerstone had been placed. She carried a small bottle of holy water and a new Bible, gifts from the bishop who'd finally understood the corruption his distance had allowed. On this rock of truth, we build anew, she declared, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Let this barn stand as testimony that from destruction can come growth, from lies can come truth, from division can come unity. We consecrate this building not just to agriculture but to community, not just to storage but to sharing, not just to the present but to the future we build together. As she blessed the cornerstone, sprinkling holy water that caught the sunset light like drops of gold. A fiddle began to play. Others joined a guitar, a harmonica, even an accordion played by one of the German families that had recently arrived, drawn by stories of a valley where justice had been restored. The dancing began as stars appeared overhead. Not the formal dances of the church socials, but the wild, joyous celebrations of people who'd survived hardship together. Former enemies danced as partners. Children of victims danced with children of perpetrators. The artificial boundaries that had once divided them dissolved in music and movement. Lum stood apart, watching, until Sister Catherine pulled him into the circle. No standing on the sidelines. Mr. Lum, you're part of this community. I was thinking about Maria, he said, his late wife's name still carrying weight after 3 years. She would have loved this, the whole valley coming together. She would have been proud of what you've done. What we've done, he corrected. I was just a farmer who found something wrong. You were the one with courage to investigate. Thomas had the conscience to keep records. Sarah had the wisdom to act. The federal marshals had the authority to enforce justice. Everyone played their part. The photographer from the territorial newspaper had set up his equipment, the large camera on its tripod looking like a mechanical spider in the firelight. Gather round, he called. Generational photograph. Everyone who helped today. They arranged themselves in front of the barn frame, over 60 people spanning 3 generations. Morrison stood in the back, trying to remain invisible until Senora Vasquez pulled him forward. We stand together or not at all, she said, echoing Lum's earlier words. The flash powder exploded, capturing a moment that would hang in the town hall for generations, a community rebuilt on truth. Standing before a barn that rose from ashes, faces turned toward a future they would build together. As the celebration continued, Mayor Jenkins, the town had held its first real election 3 months earlier, called for attention. Before we conclude, the town council has business. The new council was nothing like the old 7 members representing different parts of the community, including Mrs. Martinez, Dr. Brennan, and surprisingly, young Timothy Henderson, who'd shown remarkable courage during the investigation. Josiah Lum, the mayor announced. You've been elected to fill the empty council seat. The vote was unanimous. Lum tried to refuse, as he always did, but the crowd wouldn't hear it. You lit the match that burned away the lies, someone called out. Now help us build something true. Sheriff Hutchins stepped forward for his retirement speech, not from law enforcement, which he'd already left, but from public life entirely. I spent 20 years enforcing corruption, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I can't undo that. But I can promise this: my remaining years will be spent teaching what I've learned. Not just carpentry and building, but the cost of choosing power over justice. May none of you make my mistakes. He handed Lum a gift, a hand-carved gavel made from wood salvaged from the burned wheat field. For when you chair council meetings, remember that authority is a tool, nothing more. It's the hand that wields it that determines whether it builds or destroys. As midnight approached, families began departing, children asleep in wagon beds, adults exhausted but satisfied. The barn stood skeletal against the stars, a promise of walls and roof to come. Lum walked Sister Catherine to the rectory, their path lit by a harvest moon that turned the valley silver. It's been a year, she said. A year since you found those tracks leading to the pine grove. Feels like a lifetime. In a way, it was the man who found those tracks. The woman tied to that tree, they're gone. We've been remade by what we've endured. They paused at her gate, looking back at the valley spread below. Lights glowed in windows where families had been restored. Fields lay ready for winter planting. The church bell tower rose against the stars, no longer a symbol of hidden corruption, but of transparent faith. What now? Sister Catherine asked. We've torn down the old. We've started building the new. What comes next? The hard part. Lum replied. Living it daily, making sure we don't slide back into comfortable lies, teaching the children so they don't repeat our mistakes. And you'll stay, even after everything. Lum thought of his burned field, now heavy with grain, of his wife's grave, where truth had been protected, of the barn rising from cooperative labor, of the council seat he'd never wanted but would fill with dedication. Where else would I go? This is home. Not perfect, but honest. That's enough. Sister Catherine smiled. More than enough. It's everything. As Lum walked home under the infinite stars, he heard music still drifting from his farm where some younger folk continued dancing. The fiddle played a tune both mournful and hopeful, acknowledging loss while celebrating survival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, completing the barn, managing the harvest, navigating the complex work of communal governance. But tonight, in this moment, peace settled over the valley like a benediction. The long mountain cast its shadow protective rather than oppressive. The pine grove stood as a place of revelation rather than conspiracy. And in the heart of it all, a community had chosen truth over comfort, justice over prosperity, and in doing so, had found both. The barn would be completed before winter. The harvest would be the best in memory. Former enemies would become friends. Children would grow up knowing that courage was not the absence of fear, but right action despite it. And Josiah Lum, the reluctant farmer who'd chosen conscience over comfort, would help guide them all toward a future built on foundations of truth. One sunrise at a time. You know, friend, I've told you this story of Lum and Sister Catherine not because it happened long ago in some dusty valley, but because it happens every day, in every place where people choose to live together. The truth I learned from their journey is this family isn't just blood, and gratitude isn't just words spoken over supper. When Lum's wheat field burned, he discovered something the fire couldn't touch. A community becomes family when truth binds them together. Every person who fought Morrison's lies, from the widow Martinez to young Sarah Hartley, became kin through shared courage. They learned what I hope we never forget. Gratitude grows strongest in scorched earth, and family is forged in the furnace of standing together against wrong. Morrison spent 20 years building an empire on stolen ground. But Lum built something eternal in 1 year of truth-telling. That barn they raised wasn't just pine and nails, it was gratitude made solid. Each beam a thanksgiving for neighbors who chose conscience over comfort. The real harvest that year wasn't wheat. It was the discovery that when we're grateful for each other's courage, when we claim each other as family through trial rather than blood, we build bridges that no fire can burn. That's the gospel according to frontier folks, and it's as true today as it was then.